everyone, I'm Kale Mary.
Nice soda.
Welcome to the 11th episode of the Space Trio podcast. Today we're going to talk about tropes. And not just some of our favorite tropes, but things that are very popular in fan fiction, which occur in the original series. So Soda, just to kick us off, what are your thoughts on tropes, especially tropes that came up in the original series, which aired in the 1960s?
Yeah, the original Star Trek series, and to a certain extent, it's sequels, Next Generation, and so forth, started a lot of tropes that became very popular in television shows and movies, and some are popular to this day. Some became like jokes. They became so popular. They were so ubiquitous that people started subverting them and making fun of them. So the original series is kind of like a treasure trove of tropes.
Would you say that it's some of the first instances of these tropes that we're going to talk about today? Because I know that I feel that way.
I feel like there are some tropes that the show invented, but in a lot of cases, I think you can find earlier instances, but the show made them popular.
Exactly. I wouldn't say I know a lot about old movies, really old television, even let's say novels and things, because obviously tropes are all over the place as long as it's some form
Yeah,
of media or entertainment. You're very
exactly.
likely to have a trope. So I will say that for me, someone who in this day and age is pretty immersed in the world of fan fiction, when I started to watch the original series, I think it boggled my mind a little bit to see some of the tropes that I'm used to reading on the screen in a 1960s show. And some of them were done really well, and some of them were just laughably bad.
Yeah,
But I think it tickled me a little bit to know that, wow, so 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, there were writers and people in the creative, like in the TV room, who were thinking these same thoughts. Like, how do I entertain the crowd? Wow, here's a really, here's a creative idea. And their thoughts are not dissimilar to what we do today.
yeah, very true. I think a lot of people will be surprised to know just how creative the people who were behind Star Trek were, because for people who didn't watch the show, obviously, which are probably not listening to this podcast, but yeah, it's kind of amazing to see how basically not that they're very similar to us, basically. Yeah, they really weren't that different.
And to your point, the show actually made some of them very popular, and may very well be a reason why fan fiction writers who were writing fanzines for Star Trek continue to put those tropes into their writing and still do to this day.
Yeah, and they say that the Star Trek fandom is one of the. It's not the first instance of fandom, but it is like
One of the
the
oldest.
one of the oldest, the mother of the modern fandom, something like that, like the parent of the modern fandom. So it basically influenced every fandom that came after it. So it's not surprising to see a lot of the tropes from the show, not exactly from the fandom, but from the show somehow find their way into other fandoms.
I had one more thought here. I think a lot of the tropes that may be in fan fiction today, especially the ones that are geared more towards the, let's say, the romantic sexual stories.
Yeah,
It's kind of funny when you think about it, but you do see some of that in a, let's say, a what we call a PG fashion, in a more
yeah,
censored way. But you do see some of those tropes in Star Trek,
yeah.
and I really want to talk about one that I think stands out the most, and kind of for me kicks off like tropes in the
Yeah,
original series that everybody still loves today. And the first one is Mate or Die.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first Slash fanfiction was written specifically because of that episode.
And folks, we're talking about Amok Time.
A mock time, exactly.
So, and it's funny that you mentioned Slash, Soda, because this is, I mean, a lot of people think of this as a Kirk Spock episode, but at the core of the Mate and Die, it really has nothing to do with Kirk. From the Mate perspective, at least.
It really depends on how you look at it, I mean, well, in the episode, Spock enters the sort of mating period for his species, the Vulcan, and as we learn, he basically becomes. He needs to either mate or he'll die, basically.
His system will go so out of whack that he will literally die.
Yeah, and in the ritual that the Vulcan society has developed around that thing that happens to them, you basically do mate or die. You fight for your mate, and you either get to mate with them or you die in battle.
And it's not like it's a
So
one-time thing, it's every 7 years for the males. I'm not sure that we know if this is something that affects only the males or may affect the females in some fashion.
I think in Enterprise, the series Star Trek Enterprise, they say it also affects females in some fashion, but I think it makes more sense if it will only affect the males, honestly. But we'll discuss Enterprise in another time, probably after I watch it.
So, well, before we go too far into this, okay, so they call it, and this is my favorite turn of phrase in the series, is biological imperative.
Yeah, as I was about to say, what happens in the episode is, of course, Spock has a betrothed, and she wants him to challenge basically her boyfriend, as we later learn, and then she chooses Kirk as her fighter, I guess, to defend her honor or whatever, and she forces Spock to fight Kirk. And well, the ending is that Spock basically fights Kirk around, and they roll around on the dirt a little in some suggestive manner, and then Spock's condition goes away. So a lot of people made made the connection.
You know what's interesting to this? So if you just take mate or die in its purest form, it's either we have sex, and I'm going to assume that this is a biological imperative because it's to push the Vulcan males and females to procreate.
No.
But they don't really specify that quite. But anyway, so mate or die. If you notice, fighting only comes into it because the Vulcans have made that a part of the ritual that goes along with this biological imperative. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to really go that way, but I think it's funny because when they say the biological imperative, it makes the Vulcans so aggressive that they try to channel that through a physical altercation, a physical fight between males. And then, but they also tied into it like social status and, the fact that Spock can have someone come and challenge him for the woman he is slated to mate with when his time comes. It's not like, oh, well, we bonded you two so that you could mate together. No, she has a right to send somebody in if she doesn't want to, but if you fight him and fail, you're gonna die, and oh well, that's just tradition. That's how we do it here. So, they added a lot of, I would say, they added a lot of structure, a lot of rigor around what really is like a basic imperative.
Yeah, but I also think it's a point of, I imagine that regular Vulcans, like other Vulcans besides Spock, maybe choose to get married to their apparently betrothal is like a thing in their culture, but they probably choose to get married before the thing happens to them so they can avoid this entire ritual thing, that it isn't a must. You don't have to fight someone. And I'm guessing that if someone has made it so far into this, this period of Ponfar, it's called Ponfar, if they made it so far without tying the knots to their betrothed, it's probably not going to work between them. So it would be kind of,
But that's really harsh, Soda. If
yeah,
you end up in this fighting, like in this fight, and you end up using this ritual that requires you to actually have an altercation with a challenger and potentially, like kill him or have him kill you. Let's say death doesn't actually happen, but couldn't Spock still die? Just because of the fact that he didn't mate? Like, I feel like the only loophole here for him is that he's half human and somehow he just made it through without actually having to do the mate part.
As I said, I think most Vulcans kind of, have a contingency plan in place for that event. Like, either they get married before the event or they find, like, a partner before the event. I think Spock just kind of put it off and didn't even think it would happen to him. He said in the episode he didn't even think he would go through this because he's only half Vulcan. So and you get the sense that his betrothed to Pring also didn't really think she would come to this. Like, she already had a boyfriend. I guess it was just kind of, they didn't really expect this to happen at all.
Well, to say the least, it's a very interesting trope. And I think we can definitely agree that it's still very popular today. In fact,
Yeah,
I think even before I really got into the original series, I still knew about, like, the mate and die episode that happened in Star Trek. Like, somehow I still knew that was a thing, even if I wasn't that familiar with Star Trek. That's how popular it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it really did become very popular, and I also think that it also triggered the entire concept of going into heat, a period of heat for non-humans.
That has spawned its own type of universe, really.
Yeah,
I mean, that
yeah,
just like having a heat cycle ties in, especially these days in fiction. The alpha, beta, omega universe is super popular.
yeah.
Yeah, made or die. What can you do? If it happens to you, good luck. You better hope you have your hot love interest right next to you. So, Soda, what's on your list?
Well, if we are talking about fan fiction, I think you can't talk about fan fiction without mentioning the biggest concept that came out of Star Trek fan fiction, which is also becoming very popular today in criticism of media, not just of fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about the Mary Sue. If you've never read the Mary Sue fanfic, I'm saying go read it. Like, really go read it. It's very short. It really won't take that long. And it was written in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, as sort of like a parody about self-insert characters. Apparently, it was very popular to write like the fanfics about, like, these strong, smart women who come to the Enterprise and they're like super young, but they're also super talented, and everybody immediately loves them, including their love interest, which is usually either Kirk or Spock. The problem is, of course, they are insanely perfect in every single way to the point they're not interesting. I think I think we took this concept a little too far, especially these days when you criticize like actual media with it. I think it was meant to criticize specifically characters in fan fiction which are blatant self-inserts. Like, this is who I want to be, and so I'm writing it into this fan fiction of this media that I really love. I don't really like the way it's used today to like take every single female heroine of any story and be like, no, she's a Mary Sue, because she's the heroine, so of course she's good at things, and she's the stories around her. You mean, like, yeah, that's the point of a heroine of a story.
You're right. There's sort of a stigma that comes with that these days, especially when, someone may look at a story, whether it's for TV, movie, or for a novel, or just fan fiction, and if it's written by a female, but they may go, well, they look at it from how much of a feminist is the writer? And,
Yeah,
where does that feminism, like, go into the laughably unrealistic territory like the Mary Sue?
the original fan fiction, the Mary Sue was like 15 and already a captain of a ship, and Kirk was madly in love with her even though she was like 15. And it was it was obviously ridiculous, and that's the point of a Mary Sue. So when people say like Michael Burnham from Star Trek Discovery is a Mary Sue, it's like, no, she's just the hero of the story. There is a difference between being a Mary Sue and simply being the hero of the story.
Exactly, and there's a way to empower female characters without making them Mary Sues. You allow them to be just a really awesome human. They can be smart and capable. It's really not a gender thing, is what I'm trying to say. So, but with the Mary Sue, it's kind of obvious it is a gender thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of Mary Sue criticisms are done in bad faith. Like, the character is not really a Mary Sue, you just don't like it because she is a woman and good in things and the hero of the story, and you don't want her to be. This was a term that was really only used in fan fiction until about like 5 years ago. I've never heard it used outside of fan fiction until about 5 years ago.
Remind me, what did they call the male version of the Mary Sue?
There was a Gary Stew or something like that.
Yeah, it's something really hilarious.
Yeah, but they don't really use it a lot.
So why do we think there wasn't Mary Sue's in the original series?
I simply don't think. First of all, like I said, I don't think any female character was central enough to be a Mary Sue.
Right.
Mary Sue has to come in and like snatch the spotlight from everything.
And that's what I was thinking. The hero of the story was Kirk.
Yeah, but also again, I don't think it's possible to take a story, like an original story with a main character, and say the main character is a Mary Sue, because by the nature of being the main character of the story, they have to be, the story has to center around them. That's who they are. That's what the story is. In fan fiction, where the story is supposed to be about the characters of the story, and suddenly you put this self-insert in, then it makes sense. But in original fiction, I think it makes a lot less sense.
So do we have anything else to talk about the Mary Sue?
Not me. What is another trope that you find interesting?
Probably one of my favorite Star Trek fan fiction tropes. And if I may say so, perhaps a tenet of Star Trek fan fiction, especially when it involves the triumvirate. That is sacrificing yourself. Sacrificing oneself. I put it in my list as act of love.
Yeah.
One of my favorite episodes is obviously the empath, and
Yeah.
so here we have this trope in its finest form. When you have McCoy sacrifice himself to save Kirk and Spock. And Jim, technically.
Yeah.
Although he doesn't, at the end, everything works out, obviously. Otherwise, there would have been more episodes with McCoy in them. But the act of love is probably one of my favorite tropes, simply because I really have a soft spot for just watching characters who care about other characters, and will obviously take it to the nth degree, in which they just say, I would never let anything bad happen to those I care about. I would rather that it be me and take on that danger or whatever it is, that, or even if it's not a danger, right? If it's, say, like sacrificing one's job, or one's dreams in order to, like, say, support a family, something like that.
Yeah.
It's a very human type reaction, and there are people have the type of character to want to sacrifice themselves. I just think that when you put it in the media, like in Star Trek, it just, they play it up a little bit, right? Because, I mean, obviously in that scene where you have poor Kirk, he's going through the bins. But he would definitely sacrifice himself first if he wasn't bent over in pain. And the Vians are like, well, we need one of you. And Spock's like, I'll do it. And then they're like, no, Spock. And they say, Spock will go mad and McCoy will die. McCoy at least is able to put Kirk out of the picture because poor Kirk, I mean, obviously he dragged himself to whatever chamber he had to be tortured some more because that's what he does. Right. But they put him out of commission, and then obviously Spock is like, well, logically, now that I'm in charge, I will go. Because the person who is in charge actually doesn't need to stay intact to make decisions. Clearly, he can just walk into the torture chamber himself. That's not the way McCoy feels about it, because as you know, he hypo-sprays poor Spock. And goes, well, I am the one. I will do it. So what if I'm the doctor who could actually perhaps save the life of the person who goes into the torture chamber? It will be me.
I don't think he had much hope of, saving them after the torture.
No, he didn't. As emotional as McCoy is, I don't think he could have made the choice to stand by and let one of the others be tortured in his place. Obviously he couldn't do that. And then you see, even when Jim potentially has to sacrifice herself, cause damage to herself in order to help heal McCoy, he tries to push her away initially, saying, can't destroy a life even to save my own, something like that. So,
what you said, it's like a very, very human trope about people sacrificing themselves to people they love. It's a very, very old trope. I think you can even find it in like mythology stuff. But there's definitely an added value when it happens to, characters that you also happen to ship.
Yes.
And that happens a lot with those three in Star Trek.
That's why I said I think it's I called it a tenet of Star Trek fan fiction, because obviously people feel so strongly about the characterizations of like Kirk and McCoy and Spock that they think, oh yeah, these are active love guys. Spock takes it the furthest of anybody. Spoiler alert. But obviously they're all very willing to sacrifice themselves for each other and for the cause, even for strangers. This is just something that you see in fan fiction all the time, and sometimes I think, well, it's just a part of their characterization, but I think, well, yes, it's also a trope, because we're just going to put them into situations continually where someone needs to make a sacrifice. And of course, maybe we'll fix it before it goes too far. And
well, they did literally save Spock from death.
Yes.
Spock literally died, and they were like, okay,
yes.
we're going to bring you back to life.
Like I said, it is a very human thing, and you even see it of the Vulcan, right? I think they're just saying it's the kind of characteristic you would want in someone that you are friends with, someone that you work with, someone that is part of your family. And so I think that's why we continue to see it time and again. Good heroes will make the sacrifice.
And also, just to express how much they care about each other. You don't go and, tear through the universe to find someone that you don't really like, a work colleague or something.
So really quickly, I have just one more that I kind of alluded to. That's when I said everybody comes to save them. So I think, I didn't put this on the list, but one of my other favorite tropes is the badass crew. And let's just say that I think that is Star Trek. And not just the original series, right?
Yeah.
Almost every Star Trek series that we've had has a badass crew. And,
Exactly.
these are some competent officers, sometimes bridge officers, sometimes not, maybe mixed, who know how to work together as a unit and individually to save the day.
Yeah, and other Star Trek series kind of played with it, with not everyone being Starfleet. In Deep Space Nine, some were Bajoran militia. In Voyager, some were Maquis.
Yes.
But they're still up to the task. Let's say they still learned how to work together. They still became friends. They're still badass. They're just a badass crew. Yeah.
I really enjoy the fan fictions that take the ensemble and
Yeah.
then put them into a sticky situation, and then it's just like an episode, right? I mean, it is what Star Trek is. Take any episode where it's not just Kirk saving the day or Kirk and Spock. It's everybody doing their part to make sure that they win the unwinnable scenario. So,
Well, I think that the original series was probably the most hyper focused on Kirk, on the captain. So a lot of episodes relatively were just about Kirk and Spock and sometimes McCoy saving the day, while the rest of the episode didn't really do anything.
well, I think Scotty saved the day plenty. I feel like if he didn't know how to run that ship, they would have just they would have failed from the start.
Oh yeah, true. But I think later series probably did better with the ensemble episodes. Don't get me wrong, there are great ensemble episodes in the original series. Like The Trouble with Tribbles, probably the most famous
Yes.
episode, is basically an ensemble episode. Everybody has a part to play, and they all just do it perfectly.
So what would you say about the most recent Star Trek series then, like Discovery? How does that compare as in like a badass crew type show in comparison to the original series?
Well, Discovery is kind of weird in the sense that we don't really know who the senior staff is. Most of the characters we see are not senior staff. We know who the captain is, pretty much, and who's the second officer, but we don't really know who's the CMO. I think we saw her twice, maybe. Who's the main engineer? We don't really know. Like we just don't know. The characters we do see are competent most of the time, but like it's kind of weird that we don't really know who the senior staff is.
Well, what do you think is the best ensemble then Star Trek series?
Well, the original series obviously had Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, which were my favorite dynamic, basically. But I would be lying if I said they treated the other characters with that level of respect. Like, yes, Scotty did save the day plenty of times, but he didn't get as much screen time as those three.
No, he did it off screen.
Yeah, and well, let's not even start talking about Sulu or Chekhov or Hura. They were there, and it's nice that they were there, but they they didn't do that much.
The Abrams verse movies make up for that, especially in the third movie, Beyond. It's an ensemble movie. Everybody has their part, and their part is crucial to defeating the bad guy. So no one gets left behind.
Well, so it's just for some of the movies of the original series too, like the fourth movie, the one with the whales.
Yeah, exactly. The voyage home. I think the movies did a little more justice to that badass crew that we're used to seeing,
Yeah,
or that we all know and love.
I think so far from what I've seen, Deep Space Nine is really good with character development on all parts. Like there is not one single main character that wasn't developed somehow. But I don't think even then they don't really reach the chemistry that Kirk, Spock, and McCoy had.
So true. So Soda, what's one of yours?
Mine. Well, let's talk about the Redshirts.
Oh
So
goodness.
famous. They became so famous even though like immediately after like from the next generation onward they switched the colors so the Redshirts were actually captains and like the nameless security guards wore yellow, but the Redshirts just became like iconic for just being like faceless mooks who die.
I have to say, I think this is one of the tropes that the original series made. I mean, the name alone tells you that.
They make it. like, the funny thing is that, Redshirt didn't die during the series. During the series, not that many Redshirts died.
But if someone had to die, it was usually a red shirt.
Yeah, I think, Kirk got kind of a bad name because of that, like why so many people die under him, but not that many Redshirts actually died.
This is another one of those I call tenet of Star Trek fan fiction, because if you're going to write, especially the original series, you may have some wisecrack in there about red shirts. I mean, it just, who doesn't know about red shirts? I don't even know if you have to be like a serious Star Trek fan to know what that is. I've seen bumper stickers on cars that talk about red shirts. It's a joke almost. It's like one of those tropes that's also a joke.
Exactly. Like I know there's a very famous joke about like Redshirts and what, how do they call them? Starstormers, Star Troopers,
Stormtroopers.
Stormtroopers. Yeah, there's a very famous joke about like Stormtroopers. If Stormtroopers and Redshirts get into a fight, Stormtroopers can't hit anything with the rifle, but the Redshirts die anyway. Became very, very famous. Well, another trope that was kind of made popular because of Star Trek, but not actually was that accurate, is I don't know how to nicely put it, but the kind of character trope of a Captain Kirk type guy who just sleeps with every new alien he meets.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but this is an awful word, but a lot of people call it like the slut trope.
Yeah.
Because it's that type of behavior, do you know what I mean? It's the Kirkish type character who always saves the day and gets the woman.
Yeah.
Even if he's not actively trying to save the day, he still gets the woman.
Yeah, but I think it's even more than that, that it's like every new alien he meets, he sleeps with.
Yes, which, yeah.
That is, of course, not very accurate. Someone made a chart. Well, first of all, it was the 60s. There were very few allusions to sex in the series.
And I agree with you. That's probably one of the reasons why they did it. They're just doing it to push how far they could push probably CPS on like censorship.
Yeah. So there were basically 3 times there was very strong allusions to sex. Strong, by the standards of 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, there were like maybe 8 times he kissed a woman on screen. So all in all, in 80 episodes, something like 8 kisses and 3 sexual encounters are not that many. I think you can all agree.
Agree with that, yeah.
But even then, a lot of the times, a lot of these romantic encounters he had were kind of serving the plot as a way to distract the villain or a way to get out of a tight situation. They were usually not like, Kirk sees a woman, he starts flirting with her.
Yeah. So the sad part about this is it's such a misconception about Kirk's character that when the Abrams-verse movies were created, you had writers and producers, directors of the movies who thought this is what Kirk does. So they wrote his character that way. So he does have like multiple sexual encounters in the first 2 movies, where they're just like throwaway scenes. Why do we have to watch Kirk oogling a woman in her underwear? Or, why do we need to see Kirk rolling out of bed with the Cation twins? Like he was having a threesome. Why do we have to watch Kirk, like, trying to sleep with an Orion? Because of that misconception. They just thought he was sexually promiscuous.
Yeah, but it's not true.
Right.
I heard, like, I think I said it many times before. I've heard a lot of things about the Kelvin timeline movies, Kirk, that I don't agree with, but I'll save them for when I actually watch those movies, and then you can have a proper discussion about that.
I'll make one comment here about about that type of trope. Like you said, that this kind of misconception that Kirk really, like, he sleeps with every woman that he sees. My only disappointment in Kirk when it comes to women is that he falls in love too easily.
He does. Really does.
And he's supposed to be married to his ship. But he does. You have to admit, there are a handful of episodes where he falls in love with someone, and it's a tragic end,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Either for the woman or just for the relationship in general. Most often for the woman. I can think of at least 3 instances where she dies.
Yeah.
So,
But I think it's kind of like the point of his character that he's torn between being this very passionate guy, but also kind of being married to the job.
right. So you have to wonder, where did that Kirk being a passionate person, and you can see that he's passionate with his career, with captaining the ship, and in his relationships. Where did that somehow cross the line into being sexually promiscuous? I don't know.
I've read several articles trying to dissect this. Basically, a lot of like general machismo and reconstructing the past, and Kirk was the main character and he was the hero, and we have a certain idea of what heroes are like. And usually heroes get the girl, so Kirk had to be reconstructed as that kind of guy.
I'd say that's definitely one of the tropes that I don't like.
Yeah.
Speaking of one of the tropes that I don't like, Soda,
Yeah.
brainwashed.
Hmm.
Being brainwashed. So I think we see a lot of stuff going on with people being influenced by something or other in the original series. But what really comes to mind is like Return of the Return of the Arkans, and what happens to McCoy, because when they end up down on this planet where everyone is acting strangely, and actually it kind of reminds me like a hive mind, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's McCoy that ends up brainwashed, and then Kirk and Spock who need to figure out what is influencing all of the natives of the planet, and of course, it turns out to be an AI. Brainwashed is one of those tropes where you literally take a, a character and you hijack who they are, replace it with someone that they're not supposed to be, or make them act in a way that they're not supposed to act.
Yeah.
For me, this really kind of segues into that mind control trope as well, or mind violation even, right? So you've got in the mirror universe, where bearded Spock basically forces his way into McCoy's mind. You have Plato's Stepchildren, where Spock is made to like laugh and cry. Oh gosh, what's the other thing?
Dagger of the Mind.
Dagger of the Mind, yes. So Dagger of the Mind, where they're literally hijacking people's minds with a machine.
Yeah.
I'd say brainwashed and any kind of influence over the mind is one of those tropes where it's fun for a little while, but then when you really think about the repercussions for the character who's having been violated in that way, it then usually leaves like this kind of taste in my mouth where I'm like, ooh, I hope they got over that one. That was bad.
Yeah, I think a recurring problem with Star Trek in general, because it's such an episodic show, is that when things like that happen, they rarely get dealt with, properly.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it does become a very popular subject in fan fiction usually.
That's true, because where we don't get closure in the series, we can certainly try to create it in fan fiction.
Yeah, and usually it's a lot of heart and comfort fan fiction kind of things.
Mm-hmm. I would almost say that having some sort of brainwashing going on, mind control going on, is very popular in fan fiction these days, because it makes for a very dramatic story,
Yeah.
especially when you have other characters trying to save their friend or whoever it is that is being controlled by this other force or spell or God knows many things that it could be. And I know it probably definitely does not originate in the from the original series, but we see it more than once in some
Yeah, we
form.
do. I was actually about to ask, what is better, to be brainwashed or just have your brain stolen?
um, well, it depends on the technology of the person stealing my brain, because if they can keep it intact so that the essence of who I am can still exist, then perhaps I should just have my brain stolen. Uh, it will probably be better than having someone tear open my mind, and rifle through my privacy. So,
No, I think the only time in the original series where it was like treated as the if the gravitas it deserved is probably in the last movie, The Undiscovered Country,
yes.
where it was shown to be very unpleasant when done, non-consensually.
Yes. It brings to mind that that's one of my least favorite scenes of all the Star Trek original series movies. I actually, I had goosebumps on my arms when I would watch that scene where Cybok pulls these personal moments from the minds of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and forces them to watch them.
I was talking about the scene where Spock invades the mind of his apprentice who betrayed them.
Oh.
Country.
Yes, that's uncomfortable too. I've always had a little bit of issue with how Spock uses his gift or his ability.
I actually like that scene because, like I said, I think that's where it was treated with like the most gravitas. Like it was, yeah, this is supposed to be a bad thing. He's doing this because he's mad and because she did a very bad thing.
Yeah, so we were talking about completely different movies. I was talking about The Final Frontier. Oh gosh, because that for me is probably the one scene, but outside of bearded Spock attacking McCoy in the Mirror Universe, watching Cybok pull those memories out of Kirk,
Yeah.
Spock, and McCoy and essentially torture, try to convince them with their own pain. That that I did not like. But now that you mention it, you're right. The chilling thing about Spock doing that to his protege, you see the way he approaches her, right? He's not like wildly angry, but there's like a calculating coldness to the fact that he does it. I can see why you would like the scene, but it's a chilling scene for me. So I think we've given more than enough time to mind control. What's on yours? Give me another one.
Let's go to something a little lighter.
Yes, please.
There's something called I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, the Theiss Titillation theory. Theiss is a name, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Theiss. It's named after William Theiss, who was the in charge of costumes in the original series.
I've never heard of this.
And he was in charge of the costumes, and
Okay.
he basically created a law about what makes a costume sexy under the constraints of, the 60s censorship. And he said that what makes a costume sexy is not exactly how much skin it reveals, but how unlikely to hold up it looks like. If you look at a costume and you think there's going to be a malfunction in it, then it's sexy. If you don't understand what's holding that costume up, then it's sexy.
That makes perfect sense, actually.
The chance that it's going to rip or fall down or reveal something that it shouldn't reveal, that's what makes the costume, titillating. Hence, it's called the Theiss titillation theory.
So I read an article about where the writers of Star Trek actually put in a lot of these sexy costumes and things to sort of distract those at corporate, like the executives and the heads of the station, so that they were more concerned about, say, like censoring these things where you have sexy costumes and kissing of, like an interracial couple and things like that, so that they could then slip in fairly unsubtle messages of like racism and talking about like the Vietnam War or social commentary to what was going on at the time.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. Of everything I've read about Gene Roddenberry, he sounds like someone who enjoys um titillating women. We'll
Oh,
say it like
really?
that. He sounds like someone who would put those things in his series on purpose.
So many episodes have those crazy outfits. I mean, and it's not just like the tinfoil bikini, right? um, almost every woman from an alien species was in this costume that would show so much skin.
I think that was on purpose. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, yes, of course. Someone had to design those costumes. Like, and you
yeah.
seem to know who it is.
Well, as they say, sex sells.
Yeah. What is it about this trope that you do or do not like?
Well, sex sells. You can't argue with that much. But it was very, one-sided. Mostly the women were objectified in this way. It's usually female-centered, but I think in the original series we did have at least some episodes of Kirk losing his shirt, one way or another.
The rips and the tears, or just losing the whole shirt?
But I think in later Star Trek series it was much more female-centric. Um, you know, but I mean mostly the women were put in ridiculous costumes. I kind of like that we gotten away from it in Discovery.
How do you think this shows up in fan fiction then? Or does it?
Well, I imagine that in most fan fiction of the original series, I mean, in the new movies they did keep the miniskirts, yeah. Only they made them kind of more ridiculous by not having them have the long sleeves and the rank insignia. So who knows?
Yeah.
So it became even stupider. But most of the fanfics are very male centric, so it doesn't really show up that much.
I think it's a good point that this is just one of the things that is commonly known about Star Trek, right? The original series
Yeah.
are the costumes.
Yeah. And how revealing they were, especially considering the time.
For me, it kind of ranks there, like with the the made or die. Like people just know that that's a Star Trek thing. They go, "Oh yeah, those outfits, like that tinfoil bikini and the the weird like red leather on Belly Dancer and Wolf in the Fold."
Yeah.
Sexy women, but are they really sexy in those outfits, or is it just litigious? I don't know.
And of course the miniskirts.
I mean, sometimes, to be honest, it felt like the mini skirts weren't even skirts.
Yeah, I mean, okay, as far as like,
They were too short sometimes. I mean, maybe all the time.
but at least for them in the 60s, there was the whole, the movement of women liberation, and the miniskirts were like a symbol of sexual liberation, and apparently the actresses insisted on wearing them. So you can give that a pass, but yeah, the tinfoil bikini, the weird like jumpsuit that was like straps covering the chest, and that's it. Those were not so much.
I would say a lot of the outfits, besides the awesome colors and the glitter, especially the women's outfits, were really meant, like you said, quote, to be sexy, to like show off cleavage, show off the stomach, show off the
Yeah,
legs. I mean, some of them were made to look exotic, like the belly dancers and the almost Egyptian headdress of,
yeah, and the Elan of Troyes.
yeah,
Yeah.
Elan of Troyes. But like you said, sex sells.
And if we are talking about costumes, I also want to talk about a trope that is very popular in Star Trek, has kind of come to define Star Trek is like Planet of Hats or the rubber-headed aliens, like the aliens that are known for one thing. which is it's basically every time, almost every time in Star Trek when you encounter aliens, they are basically separated from humans in one thing, and it can be one thing in appearance, like the aliens who are half black, half white, or it can be, or it can be just something about the culture, like they're like humans, but they are acting like ancient Rome, or they're like humans, but they are all acting like it's the 1930s in Chicago, and they're all gangsters. um, this sort of thing, and it in the next generation,
So many Earth-like
yeah,
planets and
and
and human-like races. So
but
many humanoids.
yeah, but in the next generation, it kind of evolved into there is this civilization, and they have this one quality they are very, very proud of, and they all adhere to it. Like the Klingons with honor, and the Ferengi with greed, and the yeah, and they all have this one physical attribute that they're very known for, like the Klingons with their foreheads, or the Ferengis with their ears, or the Bajorans with their noses. And yeah, and there is a logical explanation for that. You want the actors to be able to act, and I think we saw what happens when you take the costumes too far, like they did in Discovery.
But you also want the audience to be able to easily tell races apart, so they have a defining characteristic.
Yeah, and they also think they did the smart thing by making the one characteristic, the non-physical characteristic, be like more like an ideal, and then when we meet other aliens, you know, they they try to live up to the ideal, but they don't always succeed. For example, Vulcans, with their ears and logic, and Spock tries to live up to logic, but eventually he learns, that you don't have to only live on logic.
Mm-hmm. You know what always confused me? When the alien race was so much like the human race that you almost didn't see any defining characteristic. And I think probably the one that stood out to me was the Kelvins from the Andromeda Galaxy. Do you remember that episode where they try to take the ship to go back to their galaxy and Scotty like gets them drunk?
The point was, I don't remember exactly. I haven't seen this episode in a long time, but I think they had like a different appearance, but they took on the appearance of humans or something like that.
Well, yes, but you never like saw them look any other way. I don't know. I just thought, well, okay, so basically, here's another race from another galaxy has somehow made it over here, and they look and act just like us.
Yeah, but I think I kind of cut the original series some slack for it because they didn't really have a lot of budget.
Yeah.
I think they tried in some parts, like with the Medusans, or just like this chest of light you can't really look at.
Well, the only difference being they had technology to turn us into cubes and then crush us. They were superior with technology. I mean, obviously, they got over to our galaxy.
Yeah, but they couldn't get back for some reason.
Yeah. Like they were scouting or something and got stranded on a planet. I can't remember what it was.
I mean, it's never really explained how they could cross the barrier in the first place.
And thinking about it, that's the episode where Spock does the mind link through the wall, through the cave wall with the guard.
Very weird. Very weird.
Oh, goodness. I think we did a whole podcast on Spock's telepathy.
There was also like the point where there were Stolians. You remember the Stolians? They were like this weird bird-like thing that we didn't really see them in person. We just saw like a
Their
picture of them.
ships, their picture and their ships, right?
Yeah, and like I think I remember reading somewhere that like every series someone wanted to bring the Stolians back, but they never had like the budget to do it or the idea how to do it properly because they were so weird. So yeah, I'm waiting for the moment the Star Trek series finally comes along and brings us the Stolians, so we'll see what those people are about. Those weird holographic bird people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they went a little crazy in the animated series, but that's
Okay, what I have on my list is probably one that's very popular in fan fiction and definitely was in the original series. It's Temporary Amnesia.
um
Oh, yay.
yeah
Oh, God. So, which means I have to talk about the Paradise Syndrome
yeah
very briefly.
yeah
Let's just say Kirk ends up on a planet with a race of Native Americans whose ancestors were Native Americans on Earth and somehow got off Earth and landed on their planet of their own.
yep
Anyway, so long story short, Kirk gets zapped and loses his memory and then gets stranded on the planet with the tribe. And they think he's like, I don't know who they think he is, like a sun god or something, who knows. He marries the chieftain's daughter, knows nothing about who he really is, and then McCoy and Spock come back to fetch him, and he
yep
gets his memory back. Was that enough? Because this episode, man. But
yeah
Temporary Amnesia, I like it better than Brainwashed for obvious reasons. There's less like violation going on.
yeah
um, but Temporary Amnesia is, I'd say, it's one of the hallmarks of what a trope is. Because what's the best way to like put someone into a very dramatic story than to strip away who they are by making them forget who they are? I think this one has been used. I'm sure it's been used before the original series, and obviously it's been used a gazillion times after in all forms of media and art. Sometimes when I start a new series, no matter what the TV series is, Soda, I think, oh, I wonder if there's going to be an Amnesia episode. you
I
know?
think yeah
It's like, well, let's just knock them on the head or zap them or, get in a car wreck or something and then forget who they are temporarily. And because there's just so much that can go on with that. It can be romantic. I mean, gosh knows how many Hallmark movies have I seen where somebody loses amnesia and then, temporarily and forgets that they hate this person and then falls in love with them. Wait, a lot.
hold on.
um, of course, it's not just limited to the original series, but I would say the way in which the original series did it in the Paradise Syndrome, I had a hard time swallowing it. It was cringy.
This entire episode was terrible. There's nothing really to say about that, but um, I think it's a good trope to like let the character re-examine them and their relationships with their surroundings, and like it's like the character gets to take a look back and take a step back and look at their lives through like clear eyes that you don't and see things that they may not see, as themselves. And I think an interesting use of that in the original series, not exactly in the original series, in the movies, after Spock comes back to life.
Yes. Yeah, you're
And
right. That's a very good example of relearning who you are.
exactly, and he basically kind of regains the same relationship he had with Kirk and McCoy, and he's kind of more comfortable with himself.
I'm trying to think, is there another like amnesia type episode other than like Scotty forgetting, what he's been doing in Wolf in the Fold and so therefore he's a murder suspect?
That is another terrible episode.
um McCoy getting injected with the his own like concoction or whatever it is, and then for like going crazy enough to like almost forget who he is, and then jump back in time. So,
Yeah.
but in that temporary bout of insanity, I don't know, temporary insanity and temporary amnesia seem very similar in this one, in this episode. But he does recover himself and realize, oh no, I'm in the past. What the heck did I do? And luckily, Kirk and Spock are there too. They're there to
Yeah.
fetch him back. So,
And their reunion is very sweet.
So that brings me to my other trope, which is time travel. And obviously, if you're on a spaceship, you're going to figure out how to time travel. I mean, clearly, if you just go around the sun backwards at a certain speed, it flings you back in time.
Yeah.
I mean, don't we all know that?
Don't we all? I think what's interesting about time travel in the original in Star Trek in general actually is that it doesn't work similarly to how we do time travel stories these days. Like these days, a lot of shows are like adhere to like the butterfly effect and the parallel universe theories that like if you change even the slightest thing about the past, it creates a whole new timeline. It doesn't just become the same timeline you lived in, etc., etc. But in Star Trek, it's like, no, if you change something in the past, the future that you come from changes. And when you come back to your future, it's different.
Well, they were not consistent on that either, because I think obviously they worried about that in like Tomorrow is Yesterday. Well, they go back in the past, but then you have, them thinking there might influence events. They keep this astronaut, no, pilot, excuse me. But then it's completely different in The City on the Edge of Forever because it's like they erase everything, potentially. There is no Federation, no
Yeah.
ships out in space if Edith Keeler doesn't die. And then there's Assignment Earth. And honestly, I'm not even sure what was the purpose of Assignment Earth, except to dress Kirk and Spock up in modern day clothes for that time and let them wander around a city.
Well, Assignment Earth was supposed to be like a pilot for a series that never happened, so yeah.
And then there's the bit of time travel in All Our Yesterdays.
Yeah.
Right? But that's completely different too, because they're not only traveling through time, they're traveling through space. Like you can go to these other different places in a different time. So
There you go.
I don't know. I think they were just like, well, let's have time travel this episode, but we can't do it like we did it last time, so let's just make it a little bit different.
Yeah,
That's the feeling I got from the original series.
Yeah, I think it just kind of played around with because there are a lot of writers working on the show, so it's like this writer wants to do that, and this writer wants to do this.
And I think to your point, though, it was a pretty popular concept in science fiction at that time. There were, you had a good many authors who wrote short stories about time travel.
Yeah.
But they all had their own theories, right, and how it worked. To your point, like the things that are on TV now, they put more thought into the science of it.
I guess so, yeah.
It's not just so much an entertainment type plot line, right? It's more like, well, our audience is a little more discerning and they're going to expect it to make sense. I think that's probably why they try to have some science talk go along with the time travel and not just, well, we went through the Guardian and we just make sure we go back the other way and maybe we won't, completely obliterate the Federation. Oh, the other time travel we should just mention, you already talked about it, the whales. They got to go back to save the whales. The whales can talk to this alien probe in the future. I mean, best plot ever.
Turns out the one with the whales is so good because so many tropes come back in it.
The other trope I had on my list, which kind of fits in with like the Assignment Earth, was Undercover.
Yeah, actually, I have another trope that ties into it, the Prime Directive, or the non-interference clause, or however you want to call it.
Yeah, those, yes. So, I mean, I had like Assignment Earth and then A Piece of the Action. I think those are one of the two most well-known Undercover episodes. But to your point, there's a reason for it.
The Prime Directive, the idea of the Prime Directive in the original series, I think it's a good idea. I think later shows kind of ruined it. But in the original series, I think it was a good idea. Because no, the Prime Directive, as I understand it, means like if there's a civilization that's not very advanced, you don't want to just come in and tell them they're not the only purple people in the universe. That there are like billions of stars with billions of planets with billions of lives on living on them, and like you can cause like actual chaos on those planets if you come and tell them that. So it's better that you avoid it.
That's the
Um,
basic concept. Don't go around making trouble
yeah.
if you have the ability to do so.
For some reason, in later series, it was interpreted as like, don't interfere with anything ever, which they kind of translated into don't save lives, don't don't get involved even if the planets are capable of traveling between planets themselves. Don't talk to them unless they talk to you. It was like it was really weird. You think what they made of it, and
Very rigorous, it sounds like.
kind of hypocritical.
Actually reminds me of the second Abrams movie where the movie opens and Spock is in a volcano. And he's in a volcano because they've come upon a planet that they're not supposed to interfere with, according to the Prime Directive. And there's about to be a massive volcanic eruption that will wipe out the civilization there. And they decide to, quote unquote, interfere without
Yeah.
anybody seeing them. So they put the ship under the ocean. So it can't be seen. Scotty's like, I don't think we're supposed to be under the water. The Enterprise is not built for this. But anyway, Spock goes in the volcano and drops something into it to freeze it up. Then make it back to the ship. Of course, Kirk and Bones are getting chased by natives. Have to jump off a cliff. And then they all get back on the ship and go on their merry way, having saved the people from destruction without those people even knowing they were there. Well, sort of. And then Kirk gets him chewed out by Christopher Pike, who's like his mentor. Like, how dare you violate the Prime Directive? And then, Kirk's trying to defend himself. That's a recent movie. That's how they interpret the Prime Directive, just like you're saying.
Yeah, I think it was heavily influenced by like the Next Generation view of the Prime Directive, because there were several episodes there of like, the civilization will be destroyed by this like terrible earthquake or volcano unless we do something. But the Prime Directive says we can do something, but we can do something without them knowing we did it. But we can't because it's interference. It's like that's not what the Prime Directive was originally about. I really just took the Prime Directive in the original series like, yeah, don't tell people who are in less developed cultures that you are from space and you are more developed than them, because it could actually cause chaos on their planet. But if those people already know they're not the only civilization in the universe, there is really no reason not to talk to them or help them.
I think this is popular just for that reason, though. I think it's popular because people interpret it their own way. If you decide to interfere, how far do you go? And for what reason? Obviously, in the original series, we saw instances where the Prime Directive was violated, even at the most basic definition, and look what happened to the civilizations. What is it, the Omega Glory?
No, I think it was a piece of the action.
Well, a piece of the action, and then, or maybe it was a pattern of force.
Yeah, better for
Yeah.
It was kind of an allegory to the Vietnam War at the time.
Yeah.
But the thing about the pattern of force is that like they didn't choose to interfere. The Klingons interfered first, so like then they kind of had to get involved or something like that.
I don't ever see it really being definitively decided on what is the Prime Directive. And I can see why it gets more complicated over time, because more and more people just think there's nuance to it and want to address that nuance.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, it makes good for stories.
Yeah,
and I imagine that we'll continue to see it in Star Trek series.
I very much hope so. I always thought that, like, so far in the 2 seasons of Discovery, we really didn't see enough, going down to planets and doing stuff on planets kind of episodes.
Well, I had two more tropes, but I really think I'm only going to mention one, and this one's not actually on the list. Soda.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's actually one that we saw a few times in the original series. It's what I call the clear my name trope. Think of episodes like Court Martial and the Menagerie, Wolf in the Fold, and even like Journey to Babel, um, where Sarek is accused of killing somebody.
Yeah.
They made a lot of use of this kind of trope in the original series, and in different interesting ways. I think for me, the Menagerie is the most interesting. Spock ends up on trial for mutiny, essentially, taking the ship to a planet that no one is supposed to contact or go back to, but he does it to keep a promise to his former captain. It's a two-part episode because it takes a long time to get through the story of why he did it. We have a lot of flashback.
Yeah. And it incorporates the pilot episode of the series.
Mm-hmm. That's an episode where Spock is, they need to clear Spock's name and obviously make sure that he's not court-martialed. But then they have the episode Court Martial literally named that just for Kirk.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is one where Kirk is set up by someone who faked his death.
And then in the animated series, you have an episode for McCoy who has to have his name cleared up.
Oh, right, the one where he like invented this vaccination or something.
Yeah, I also can't really remember what it's about, but so yeah, it's a very popular trope in the original series.
Mm-hmm. And and then Wolf in the Fold, Scotty gets
Yeah.
accused of murdering a bunch of women repeatedly. Like,
Yeah.
every time he says he didn't do it, the lights go out and another woman ends up dead, and then he's got the knife in his hand or something, or he's standing over her, and he's like, I don't know what's going on. It's my temporary amnesia. It's because I got thrown into that bulkhead. It made me crazy.
Yeah. Poor Scotty.
Yeah, that was a bad episode. And a very strange use of clear my name. Trying to make Scotty into a serial killer, really?
I actually remember seeing this trope. It pops up in fan fiction from time to time.
It makes
Yeah.
for a really good, have that, badass crew come along and help clear the name of one of their colleagues or something.
Yeah. Well, I'll say one last trope. Let's see what have we got left.
And then I want to close with one more, and then
Okay.
then we'll be done.
Well, I think we already talked about it, but maybe it's worth mentioning again. The character archetypes of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. The Freudian trio, the logic, the emotion, and the balance between them.
So many comparisons. The heart, the soul, and the mind.
Yeah.
The ethos, the pathos, and
Service, yeah.
yeah.
And they have become like character tropes in themselves. I think the Spock is the most popular one, like the logical person who doesn't value emotions very much. But there are McCoys and Kirks all around too.
Yeah, because they embody those certain characteristics. I would say that we respect. I mean, we almost expect that someone has some part of each of those. That's what makes us well-rounded, intelligent human beings. But it's very interesting when they sort of break it out into individual characters in the way that they do with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And you know how, like you said, Kirk is sort of representative of the balance between Spock and McCoy, the logic and the emotionalism, the mind and the heart.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find they switch roles a little bit. Do you agree with that?
I think that's the hallmark of good character writing. Like, no one can ever be, really just the logical one or just the emotional one.
Yeah.
And even the rational one sometimes has, leans towards one or another. And I think in those instances it does make sense. Like if Kirk is in trouble, Spock does show more emotions. If someone is in trouble in general, if Kirk and Spock are acting a little crazy, then McCoy has to be a little more rational. So yeah, it's just good writing, honestly.
And you would think that because they do balance each other out so well, the three of them together, that after a certain period of time, they themselves will be better at what they were weaker at. Like Spock is a great example. He's not just purely logical by the end of the original series movies, right?
Yeah.
He knows how to have a balance between his emotion and his logic.
Yeah, I think it's so the character analysis of McCoy that says like he's not actually only emotional, but he just tends to be that way when he's contrasted with Spock because Spock is so unemotional. So when Spock becomes less rigid in his logic in later years, McCoy becomes less more rational.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that because there's no way McCoy could be a doctor and a successful doctor if he was like he gave into his emotions at every turn. I mean, he has to have some self-control, and he has to be able to be objective and partial, and not to be emotional, especially when he's dealing with patients. He has to consider the fact that his treatment may not save them, or maybe he's got patients who are terminal. So, I mean, just by the nature of the work that he does, he cannot be purely emotional. He would never survive.
Exactly.
His patients would never survive him. I find Kirk really fascinating in that regard because you see at times where Kirk swings one way or the other. He's being overly emotional. He's, reacting with that passion that we all know him for, and then times where he's really, really calculating. And I think he's most rational, logical when he's in the captain chair. But he always brings that element of surprise and of unpredictability that usually is what helps win the day.
I think that's kind of the point. That in the place of the captain, Kirk knows that he can't just be one way or another. He has to be both.
Mm-hmm.
He has to make the choice essentially. Like Kirk and Spock and McCoy can voice their opinions, but ultimately the choice is his.
Which is why I think I find it more fascinating when we have episodes like, oh, what is the Cloud episode? The one where, he wants revenge for the Cloud that killed his captain.
Yeah, obsession.
Yes, obsession. Yes, of course, obsession. And guess who the rational ones are? I mean, like having to talk him down, almost, take him off duty. Spock and McCoy.
And of course, Consciousness of a King.
Right.
Where they also play the rational people to his emotional.
Right, but I think Kirk has far more self-control in Conscious of the King than he does in Obsession. Obsession, it was almost like, what is wrong with him?
Yeah.
He's a little dramatic even for Kirk.
Yeah. And I also like the point in the Cloudminders where Kirk basically traps himself in the minds with, the representative of the two people. And you can kind of see him starting to get crazy, and you realize that's the effect of the drugs.
Yes.
The gas in those minds. It's fascinating that you can see him getting a little crazier.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And Shatner's acting, of course, just plays that up. So I just wanted to have a couple of honorable mentions, so I won't talk about them long. The first one is the Bodyswap.
Mm-hmm.
Definite honorable mention because I think this surprised me the most when I saw this episode for the first time. I thought, oh my gosh, there's Bodyswap in the original series. This is the Turnabout Intruder, where Janice Lester, who is a former acquaintance of Kirk, almost love interest, I would say.
I think she's his ex-girlfriend.
Yeah. So let's say former love interest of Kirk, has basically gone over the deep end and somehow discovered this alien technology that allows her to switch her consciousness with Kirk. So she lures him into this place where she does that, and then Kirk in a woman's body, and you have Lester in Kirk's body. And Shatner plays that to his utmost, being a crazy woman inside a man's body. I mean, at the end, you see the ship has to, or the crew has to eventually mutiny against their own captain in order to side with their real captain.
Yeah.
I just remember being amazed to see Bodyswap in the original series and thinking, wow, this is definitely like a really popular fan fiction trope right now.
Yeah.
You know, I see it a lot in other dramas and stories and stuff where, you know, it just makes so much hijinks, right? Hijinks and humor. But this, they're just not, they're not doing it in a humorous way at all. They're just really over the top with it in the original series. So I think it had a lot of potential. They used it in a strange way, but it was really interesting to see that trope used by Star Trek.
I think the point of it is usually like that the characters see the world from the other person's perspective or experience or whatever. But they don't really do it in the Turnabout Intruder. Like, I
No,
don't think either of them really learns anything from being in the other's body. It's just like
no, it's purely drama.
inconvenient.
It's you know, just another evil mastermind plot
Yeah.
to get back at Kirk. But it does lead to Spock having to mind meld with the body of Janice Lester in order to identify as captain.
Yeah.
And, you know, Kirk gets to say, "You know me, Spock. You know my mind."
You know it better than anybody else.
What a great way to end the original series.
Yeah.
For all the Spurk fans out there. And then the other honorable mention I had, there's this whole, like, aliens made me do it. Like, some type of external influence makes you do something that you wouldn't normally do. And that's a very, very popular trope in many different forms in fan fiction. And in this particular episode, This Side of Paradise, it's happy spores. So the crew gets sprayed in the face by these plants. And the next thing you know, Spock is hanging upside down out of a tree. And everybody's abandoned the ship. Sort of like another mutiny, right? They've all abandoned the ship to go frolic on the planet. And Kirk is really upset about it.
Was it? I don't think it was ever explained why Kirk wasn't influenced by those happy spores.
Well, didn't he get sprayed in the face like towards the end, and then he had to fight it or something by using anger? I mean, he, you know, obviously he discovered anger was the cure for happiness.
Which makes sense. Yeah.
And got Spock to practically, like, you know, break him.
Yeah.
But yeah, what an episode. So obviously happy spores, again, something that surprised me when I first saw it in the original series. I was like, wow, this is pretty popular as like a, you know, a trope in fan fiction.
You know,
Like
when
as
you
a
said,
made me do it trope, and here it is
yeah.
in the original series.
You know, when you said made me do it, it made me think about, well, you know, before I watched the original series, I knew there was the first case between a black and a white, black woman and a white man, and what I didn't know, I thought it was going to be an actual, you know, romantic case, but that it was basically just an aliens made them do it plot.
Yep, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
There's a few instances of aliens make them do it.
Yeah. If there's one small trope that I wrote down, it's the split personality thing.
Yeah.
The anime routine. It also became very popular in TV shows when like a character gets split into different aspects of their personalities. And in this instance, it was like evil Kirk versus good Kirk, but
It's very,
evil Kirk.
very basic duality.
Yeah, but actually, it wasn't that basic because evil Kirk was also like charismatic and um not aggressive, but like he was aggressive, but he was like proactive, and in good, Kirk was like very meek and passive, and that was also interesting because the point of the episode was that one couldn't exist without the other.
Yeah.
Like he needs both.
I just found it interesting that they went. That's what I meant by duality, was they went the basic like good versus evil concept, and then
Yeah.
like you said, they added all these different traits to each of those good and bad Kirks that made them more interesting. As you and I mean, as we all know, human beings are really complicated, especially when it comes to like all the character traits and tendencies that make them who they are. So I found it personally interesting that, like you said, they decided like weakness and being sort of pathetic went along with being good. Like what?
I think we had also something interesting about that. That maybe that's what Kirk sees. Maybe that's what he considers good and evil. Maybe he sees like this charisma and like proactive slash aggressiveness is something that is actually kind of bad, and so the opposite is what is kind of good.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Um,
And
I'd say he needs to see a therapist so he can he can come to terms with all that he is.
I think they all need a therapist on the starship. um,
Technically, don't they have a psychologist?
in the original series, I have no idea. I don't think so.
I thought that was Dr. Helen Noel from the Dagger
Yeah,
of the Mind.
and she was like a specialist there for like a limited time, wasn't she?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a very old trope, all the
Yeah.
way back to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and
Yes,
yeah.
yes. That's very true.
Any more tropes that you have?
Well, I mean, the obvious one, probably the last one we should talk about just quickly, is mirror universe.
And yeah,
Mirror universe, basically the concept of reflecting a world, uh, like through a dark mirror, so to speak, or reflecting a world where you make choices that lead you down a different path, and
yeah.
then everything is different from what as you know it. So obviously, in fan fiction, it really goes two ways, right? So you have it very much like the episode, right? You have someone who's from outside the universe, who comes into this mirror universe and goes, "Well, this is not my universe," and everything's turned on its head. This good versus evil doesn't just seems flip flopped, and I don't fit here, I don't belong here because this is clearly opposite of everything that I consider normal. And then the other side, the other path you would take in fan fiction is that's just how the world is, right? So a lot of people like to explore the mirror universe trope
Yeah,
by writing those type of dystopian worlds.
yeah. This stuff, yeah, has been popular for a long time, and
Yeah.
the mirror universe is fascinating from that perspective. Yeah.
And so basically, Star Trek does a lot of dystopian. Let's just say they encounter a lot of worlds with problems.
Well, yeah.
but I think only in the mirror universe do they actually see the flip flop of their world or what
Exactly.
their reality is. And then of course, they kind of spread that concept. They do it a few more times in other Star Trek series.
I think the most interesting thing about this is that Star Trek from the original series has been always kind of the characters have always had to kind of contend with the awareness that their future, which is kind of utopian future, that they are aware it's a utopian future of some sort, is not like obvious. It's not like a given. It took a lot of hard work, and basically without it, they wouldn't have it. So whether they come into contact with less fortunate planets, or if a different universe where it isn't like that, they have to contend with that reality that like their world only works because people strive to do good things.
So the mirror universe from Star Trek original series is, I'd say, the one episode that spanned its own line of fan fiction. Like purely mirror universe fan fiction. I'd almost say it's like its own fandom sometimes.
Yeah, it can be.
For me, that makes it, I'd say, like top of the list in tropes because of just the way that so many fans of Star Trek took to the concept and then use that basic concept to expand upon and create just this whole plethora of versions of the mirror universe that far, I think, surpass anything that any of the series did with it.
Yeah, I agree.
So kudos to fans. You are what makes these tropes thrive.
Exactly.
Well, we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Bye.